Welcome back. We end the week, like we end too many weeks, talking about yet another mass shooting, this time at a Texas high school. 9 students and 1 teacher are dead. 10 others are injured after a 17-year-old student walked into an art class and opened fire with a shotgun belonging to his dad. A second student is also in custody. This comes in a week where Publix drew a distinction between its support for Republican gubernatorial candidate Adam Putnam and his, quote, "I'm an NRA sellout," unquote, position. And in lighter news, President Trump accuses President Obama, here we go again, of planting an FBI spy in his presidential campaign, an accusation circulating in conservative media and is unsupported by actual facts. The Mueller campaign is a year old. Will the president sit down with him? And we're not mentioning Stormy Daniels this week. Joining us for more are Jack Brill, the vice chair of the Sarasota Republican Party, Rita Ferrandino, a former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Zach Anderson, the political editor of the Herald Tribune. And welcome to you all. Let's start with Texas. What's different this time is it was not an AR-15. It was not one of those weapons that everybody's railing against in terms of being a weapon of war. This was your dad's shotgun. And Rita,
how tragic that we're sitting here on a Friday evening discussing that it was, you know, it's a tragedy, it's a deep tragedy, and I think, and I hope and I pray that we as the American people get behind, we have got to do something about smartening our gun laws.
Well, let me ask you about that, because we just smartened our gun laws in Florida, but it doesn't appear to me that this would have dealt with this situation.
Many of us believe that we've hardly done anything here in Florida, and what we did was just a small token to keep things quiet. And I hope the Parkland students and all the students get back to this, their pickets and their.
But let me just stay on that, because this.
Kids are dying.
I understand that. But in this country, people have shotguns, and this was a legally purchased shotgun. This was not a situation where a kid under the age of 21 purchased a AR-15.
Alan, at the end of the day, we have an obligation to our children to keep them safe. They need to be safe when they go to schools. We're a smart society. We have to be able to figure this out. We have to.
Jack, the lieutenant governor of Texas said today that the problem is there are too many entrances to schools. Really?
There is, when you look, obviously, there's a number of entrances, and it only takes one. You can sit there and harden all the entrances. If one student sees somebody and they, opens the door, there's your entire security system's breached.
And that is the way that we end mass shootings at schools?
Didn't say that, but this thing's all being obviously unfolded. So a couple questions happen. I think I remember Mark Zuckerberg was just in the Senate saying Facebook was going to be doing a lot more to watch this. And this idiot is out on Facebook 3 weeks ago with posting "Born to Kill" and mentioning Nicholas Cruz. So that's a great one on social media for Facebook. Secondly, I'm going to go back to something, obviously there was Anita Priors for the whole thing, but as I recall, parents are parents. So how the heck did this kid ever get a hold of his father's shotgun?
Well, those are all really good points, but they're not solutions, and we need solutions. It's time. I work in the education industry, and there's a lot of really strong, good conversation happening around school reform and how to solve these problems. There are districts that are simply just putting their policemen, when they're writing their reports that they do on anybody's streets, putting them in the school parking lots during a school day, just to have more police presence. There's things to do.
But I think the school resource officer was one of the ones injured today, so at least they were engaged.
At least they were engaged.
Hold on, folks. Once again, a president of the United States had to face the cameras after yet another mass shooting. This is what President Trump said today.
My administration is determined to do everything in our power to protect our students, secure our schools, and to keep weapons out of the hands of those who pose a threat to themselves and to others. Everyone must work together at every level of government to keep our children safe.
Zach, what does that mean? I mean, we did something about gun laws in Florida. The federal government has done absolutely nothing.
Well, let's just say first, Alan, this is absolutely sickening what happened today, and it's disturbing that we have to keep talking about events like this on your show and all over the country. I think you brought up a good point about the AR-15. You know, I mean, that really became a rallying cry after Parkland shooting because that weapon was used in that shooting, and people were really looking to that as we can ban this weapon and let's go from here. But obviously, there is no silver bullet to stopping, you know, these types of incidents. That when you have a shotgun and a pistol used, I talked to a Republican lawmaker today who said, "Gosh, are we going to ban shotguns now? I mean, I've been hunting my whole life, and I have lots of shotguns in my family." And it's a legitimate question, and I think there will be a re-evaluation to some degree of what is the most effective way to address this.
Right, we are getting warmed up. We'll have much more on the week in Washington right after we check the first look weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the Texas school shooting today, the upcoming summit between the U.S. and North Korea, and the Russia probe. And joining us for more are Jack Brill, the vice chair of the Sarasota Republican Party, Rita Ferrandino, the former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Zach Anderson, political editor of the Sarasota Tribune. Let's continue the talk about the gun issue, because there is a Florida angle to it that really has popped up this week. Publix supermarkets has given more money to Republican gubernatorial candidate Adam Putnam than I believe any candidate in history, even though, as it's been pointed out, that Adam Putnam says that he is a self-described sellout for the NRA, to which Publix then responded that it supports Adam Putnam but not the NRA. Zach, this has really kind of caught fire in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, this was sort of a fascinating intersection between a commercial brand and a hot button political issue, and you saw Publix really sort of backpedal and say, no, we support the candidate, but we don't necessarily support his positions on guns, and we've never given money to the NRA. It just shows how sensitive this issue has become after the Parkland shooting, and I'm sure it'll get even more sensitive now after this Texas shooting, and the NRA has really become a lightning rod in all of this. We saw it here in Sarasota in the congressional race with Congressman Vern Buchanan, who got money from the NRA for some of his campaigns, and then Gabby Giffords, a congresswoman who was shot by a gunman and who has become a gun control activist. Her PAC started going after Buchanan and calling him bought and paid for by the NRA. It was a relatively small number of political contributions that he got, but he's endorsed by the NRA. I think this is an issue that is going to be salient in a lot of these swing elections this cycle.
Rita, let's first talk about the public situation, because there are some Democrats who want a boycott of Publix because of its support of Adam Putnam. Anybody who does any shopping around here knows that's not really a pragmatic thing to do. But, you know, what are our local Democrats saying?
First of all, I have a long history of catching Publix. They have always been very partisan. They're very pro-GOP. And during my tenure as chairman, I had many conversations where I called into Lakeland and the leadership to complain that their partisan activities were offensive to me as a patron.
And what was the response when you would do that?
They're very clear that their allegiance is to the Republican Party. I stopped shopping at Publix a very long time ago for that very reason. And I think the reason this is such a big lightning rod is because they've got this long history of partisanship, and there just is no reason. We've got here in Sarasota, I'm going to argue with you, there are many alternatives to Publix today, and there's no reason to support. I don't want the money that I worked so hard for to go to supporting partisan activities.
Well, my point, in fact, though, I mean, I do know, because I do look at these things, that Publix does give money to some Democratic office holders, incumbents usually, but including incumbents in the Tampa Bay area.
It's not even, if that's true, which I'm happy for you to note, it's nowhere near any of this. They gave almost $1 million to play in a Republican primary. They have given nothing to any Democratic candidates. That doesn't feel good to me.
Jack, let me just ask you for 1 second, is some opinion, even among Republicans around here, changing in terms of what the NRA is doing and the influence that they wield? We had Joe Gruters here just a couple of weeks ago, very emotional, because the NRA basically sent out a press release saying he is a failure because he voted for the Florida gun legislation.
And Joe's also a father of 3 children, like Zach's, your
Like
2 children. They're going to be in public schools, and Joe did the right thing on that. And I want to go back to the Publix for a second. You know, you got to remember with Adam Putnam, he's a Bartow, family. Lakeland, they're all Polk County. They've been supporting him since his first run of office, all the way through. And, Rita won't like this comment, but, maybe they've got a knack for picking the best candidates to support.
Or the fact that he's the agriculture commissioner and they've been getting some kind of favors for their work. That's another potential side of it.
Another side of it, but, and you have to look at, from the agricultural, standpoint, where do they get a lot of their produce? So there's different ways to look at everything.
But the bottom line is that's their activity.
Jack,
They're
let me
private
bring up for a
company, they can
second
do it.
something that Zach brought up a few minutes ago, and that is the Giffords Gun Group throwing money against Vern Buchanan. The Giffords organization is not something that they don't target every congressperson in every election cycle. If they're going to do it, they do it because they're doing polling or there's an indication that seats may be vulnerable. And
I'm going to say for $15,000, if they think Vern is a sellout to the NRA for 15 grand, they need to have a reevaluation of what can be what that will do. Yes, there's a little there's been some buzz this year. But, this is still a very, very solid, likely Republican seat. Vern will be reelected. He's going to have a good, there'll be a good race this year. But, I think the Giffords, their intentions are good. I think they're targeting the wrong congressman for the wrong amounts. There are a lot of other folks in other parts of the country.
Rita, I'll give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, $15,000 to some of us is a lot of money, and Vern did take the money, and that's the consequence.
I'm saying he couldn't be bought for $15,000. I don't disagree with you. It's a lot of money, but Vern's not going to be bought for
he took
$15,000.
the money, and in today's world, the Parkland students came out pretty clear, tying the NRA to death. It was on all of their placards. It still is. So if you're taking money from the NRA, that's a consequence.
There is other stories in the news this week, including the latest in the Russia investigation, and the president's new attorney, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, has been all over the place in terms of his defense of the president, talking about whether or not the president will sit down with the Mueller team, and talking about everything else that is orbiting around this investigation, including whether or not the Obama FBI placed a FBI spy in the Trump campaign. This is what the former mayor had to say.
I believe if there was an embedded person, that person cleared us because the FBI cleared us. I wonder what the heck is the legitimacy of the Mueller investigation in the first place. The FBI came to the conclusion there was no evidence of collusion with Russia. End of case.
Zach, hold that thought for a second, because, Jack, I got to ask you, I have not seen the FBI release anything saying that they have come to any kind of conclusion that there was not collusion.
Well, here's the great thing. Rudy Giuliani has got us talking about what he said, what the difference between what he said on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Guess what? We don't know what the strategy really is.
And Zach, let me ask you this, because polling shows that that the Mueller campaign is losing credibility, the Mueller investigation, I'm sorry, is losing credibility among Americans, because the president is out there saying what he is saying, Giuliani is out there saying what he's saying. In the end, is it an effective strategy?
I think it is an effective strategy to some degree by keeping Republicans on board. That's the strategy. They want to keep their base from defecting. The majority of Americans still believe that Mueller should be able to do his investigation. That hasn't eroded substantially. I think it's more than 60% of people still believe that Mueller should be able to be unfettered in his investigation. One of the interesting things that Giuliani said this week was that Mueller was not going to indict Trump, and that's fascinating. I mean, I think a lot of legal analysts thought that was probably what was going to happen.
Can you even believe that?
I don't know, but apparently there's people in the Justice Department, there's years of opinions going back that said that you can't indict a sitting president. So this wasn't a big surprise, but it just underscores the fact of how important the 2018 election is. You know, I think Republicans and Democrats are really going to be talking about, you know, that this is critical in terms of being a check on the president. And Democrats are openly talking about impeachment, which really ups the stakes of this election. And I think Republicans are going to use that to push back dramatically, but we see that that's probably the mechanism. If anything is going to happen from this investigation, that's probably how it's going to be enforced.
You know, Rita, on Friday nights after we watch ABC 7 at 7, I go home and I watch Bill Maher with my wife, and he basically said last week, why don't Democrats have the cojones to actually campaign on this very issue?
That I completely agree with. I mean, I think it is going to be a really big issue in the 2018 election. And you're right, this is all hitting a feverish pitch because it's all about the elections and midterms.
Jack?
And going back to something you said earlier about the Mueller investigation, it's a year. So we've got taxpayer money that's been spent, all this money for the last year, and then it just goes on and on and on, and the money keeps getting spent, and then they take multiple lives of their own.
And every time you turn around, there's more to investigate.
We are going to pick up where Jack left off right after we take this break. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Jack, I'm going to start with you because you said this has been going on for a year now and it's time to wrap it to a close. The Vice President said something to that effect earlier this week. But you got to point out to you that, you know, Whitewater was a 7.5-year investigation. Watergate was a 2-year investigation. There were almost 200 congressional hearings about what happened in the Obama administration. Hillary Clinton sat down for over 11 hours during the campaign with the House Judiciary Committee. I mean, should the length of an investigation be determinant about whether or not it's worthy or not worthy?
Well, I think you've got to look at if it doesn't start taking multiple paths, and these things all have legs. Every time an investigation starts up with a very specific mission, here we are a year later, there's probably 12 different missions going on in investigation and areas. And obviously, all the arrests that have been made for are the folks that did all their stupid stuff, had nothing to do with the administration.
But how do you know what Mueller has or does not have? I asked this to Greg Steube last week, saying if there was collusion, we would know about it now. That's not how prosecutors work.
That's true. I agree. I agree with you. They've got to hold their cards close. You know, that's their job.
Rita, there is something to fatigue when it comes to this, and I know people on both sides of the political spectrum who are just dog-tired about hearing about Russia, 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 like Marsha Brady every day.
So I think we need to let the process work as it's supposed to. It's not, you know, under a timeline. We have seen, as the examples you just gave, that these are laborious, difficult, very important to get. We've got our the integrity of our elections process in the balance here, and so I think we should investigate to find out what it is. And I don't, you know, if the American people are tired of hearing about Russia, that, you know, we're going to stop investigating because the public opinion.
Do you remember Nixon saying a year of Watergate is long enough?
That was a really impactful.
Zach, you have your finger on the pulse of politics around here. Do you have any change in your sense of whether or not the Russia investigation will have any impact on the midterm elections?
It's hard to say. You don't really see candidates campaigning really aggressively on it. Democrats, I think, are a little bit nervous about going all in on this because they know that some people do agree with the president that this is a witch hunt, or at least they don't think that it's the most important thing that we could be talking about, maybe healthcare, maybe the economy, maybe things like that. So I think there is a little bit of reluctance for Democrats, especially in locally where a lot of the seats lean Republican, to go necessarily all in on this. But you know, this is an investigation that has produced quite a significant number of results. There's a lot of people that have been charged. There's a lot of people, you know, that are still being interviewed and under investigation. So at this point, I think it's hard to say that they haven't produced anything. And I think the American people, when you look at polls, for the most part, still do support him going forward on
Real
this.
quick, Jack, should the president sit down with Robert Mueller?
No.
Why?
No need to. There isn't any collusion. Let's save the taxpayers' money and get the investigation over with.
Rita.
Absolutely. What is I mean, this is America. He should be held to the same standards the rest of us would be. He should do it.
Zach, Rudy Giuliani says that there is no legal requirement for the president to do that, and then one thinks back to Watergate, and the Supreme Court upheld the subpoena against Nixon to turn over the tapes, and President Clinton did sit in front of the grand jury.
A lot of people thought it would hurt Trump that he didn't turn over his tax returns, that it looked like he was hiding something. You could argue that it would hurt him if it looked like he didn't want to testify, but he's been able to defy, that type of speculation his whole candidacy and his whole political career. So I think that with this president that shoots from the hip, and you don't know if what he's going to say might put him in legal jeopardy, I would be surprised if they actually have him testify, but who knows?
We have to leave it there. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about last night's show on the U.S. Embassy moving to Jerusalem. Republican or Democrat, Israel has always been a unifying cause, defending its right to exist, and it still is, but there is a growing divide among the American Jewish community when it comes to the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the lack of progress when it comes to peace with the Palestinians. Sam says, finally a president who keeps his promises and does what he says he is going to do. Joanne says the move to Jerusalem was not the fulfillment of a promise, it was posturing by Trump, pure and simple. And Kevin says we can no longer be seen as a peacemaker in the Middle East, and what did the Palestinians get in return? Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. We want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. Jack Brill is the vice chair of the Sarasota Republican Party, and former Democratic Party chair Rita Ferrandino, and the political editor of the Sarasota Herald Tribune, Zach Anderson.